The headlines exploded almost instantly. Attorney General Pam Bondi declared that the Department of Justice had released all the Jeffrey Epstein files in its possession. Moritantachi confirmed that over 300 names of government officials and politically exposed persons were listed in the materials. To the public. It sounded like the moment many had been waiting for the unveiling of a so-called Epstein list. A roster of alleged clients, a map of hidden power, a confirmation of years of suspicion. But almost immediately, confusion and backlash followed. Lawmakers, journalists, and legal analysts began warning that this was not what it appeared to be. This was not a secret client ledger. This was not proof of guilt, and in fact, according to the Department of Justice itself, there has never been any verified evidence that Jeffrey Epstein kept a formal client list documenting criminal participants. The truth, as always in this case, was far more complicated and far more unsettling. The release came in the form of a formal letter dated February 14th, addressed to Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley, Ranking Member Dick Durbin, House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan, and Ranking Member Jamie Ryan. The letter explained that under the newly passed Epstein Files Transparency Act, the Department of Justice was legally required to turn over and disclose all Epstein-related materials in its possession. Not just the documents themselves, but also summaries explaining what had been released, what had been redacted, and why. Most critically, the law required the DOJ to produce a list of all government officials and politically exposed persons, named or referenced anywhere in those materials. That requirement is what created the now infamous list of more than 300 names. Pam Bondi made clear in a letter that the department had released files across 9 major categories. These included materials relating directly to Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell, flight logs and travel records, communications involving government officials, immunity agreements, internal Justice Department decisions about prosecutions, records relating to destruction of evidence, and materials surrounding Epstein's death. However, some information was withheld. The DOJ explained that certain documents were protected by attorney-client privilege, and that personally identifying information of victims was redacted to protect their privacy. The department also noted that some names were omitted if they were connected to ongoing investigations. But Bondi emphasized a key point that would become central to understanding the entire controversy. Names appeared in these files in a wide variety of contexts. Some people had direct communications with Epstein. Others were mentioned only in passing. Some were referenced in news articles, email blasts, or unrelated correspondence. In other words, being named did not mean being guilty. Yet once the names became public, the reaction was explosive. The list included some of the most famous and powerful people on Earth. Political figures like Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden. Business titans like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg. Celebrities like Jay-Z, Beyoncé, George Clooney, and Michael Jackson. Even historical figures like Elvis Presley and Fidel Castro appeared, despite the fact that some of them had died long before Epstein's crimes became known. The sheer scope of the names stunned the public, but lawmakers quickly warned that the list lacked context. Representative Nancy Mace accused the DOJ of withholding critical evidence, saying the files released were not complete and that the excuses given would not stand up in court. She questioned where key evidence was, including visitor logs from Epstein's New York mansion and potential audio and video recordings from Epstein's private jet, known as the Lolita Express. Representative Ro Khanna raised another concern. He pointed out the absurdity of placing people like Janis Joplin, who died when Epstein was still a teenager, on the same list as convicted sexual predator Larry Nassar. Without context, Khanna warned the list risked misleading the public, and that concern quickly proved justified. When investigators and journalists began examining the files, they discovered that many of the names had only the most trivial connection. Janis Joplin, for example, appeared in an email recommending songs to Epstein. Kurt Cobain was mentioned in a newsletter Epstein had received. Barack Obama appeared in news articles forwarded to Epstein. Bruce Springsteen was referenced in concert emails. None of these references suggested wrongdoing. They simply showed that Epstein consumed news, music, and pop culture like anyone else. But other names had more troubling connections. Bill Gates, for instance, had documented meetings with Epstein, which Gates later admitted were a mistake. Epstein had even allegedly tried to use Gates' personal life as leverage, claiming Gates needed medication after encounters with women Epstein had introduced him to. Gates has denied wrongdoing and said he regretted ever associating with Epstein. Elon Musk was also drawn into Epstein's orbit, with emails showing Epstein attempting to arrange social interactions involving Musk's brother, Kimball Musk, and women Epstein selected. Actor Chris Tucker had appeared in photographs with Epstein and Maxwell and was referenced in Epstein's communications as planning visits. George Clooney's name appeared in emails discussing film festivals and social events, though there was no evidence Clooney had any criminal involvement. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos appeared in emails, suggesting Epstein wanted to connect socially with him. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg was referenced in plans for dinners and meetings involving Epstein and other tech leaders. Some connections were deeply disturbing. Investor Leon Black faced allegations from victims who claimed they were abused by him at Epstein's properties. Black denied the allegations, and an independent review said he paid Epstein for financial advice, not criminal services. However, the scandal forced his resignation from Apollo Global Management. Virgin Group founder Richard Branson exchanged emails with Epstein and even discussed helping rehabilitate Epstein's public image after his conviction. Branson later said he cut ties once he learned the full extent of Epstein's crimes. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers admitted he continued communicating with Epstein after his conviction and said he was deeply ashamed of doing so. Even media personalities, politicians, and entertainers appeared in Epstein as a correspondent, sometimes in social invitations, sometimes in fundraising events, sometimes in completely mundane contexts. One particularly explosive allegation appeared in an FBI tip where a woman claimed she had been abused by Epstein and others, including Harvey Weinstein and Jay-Z. However, like many tips received during that period, the allegation was uncorroborated and never resulted in charges. This distinction became central to understanding the entire release. Jeffrey Epstein himself had built his wealth and influence by surrounding himself with powerful people. He attended elite parties. He donated money. He offered financial advice. He inserted himself into the worlds of politics, business, and entertainment. Association was his currency. It gave him protection. It gave him legitimacy. And it made it harder for anyone to imagine the truth, because that truth was already known. In 2008, Epstein was convicted in Florida for soliciting prostitution from a minor, Iserve, just 13 months in jail under a controversial plea deal. Despite that conviction, he was able to re-enter elite society. He continued attending events. He continued meeting powerful people. He continued operating in plain sight until his arrest in July 2019. Just weeks later, on August 10th, 2019, Epstein was found dead in his jail cell. His death was ruled a suicide, but it ended the possibility of a criminal trial that might have exposed the full scope of his network. His associate Ghislaine Maxwell would later be convicted and sentenced to prison for her role in trafficking minors. But beyond Epstein and Maxwell, no one else has been criminally convicted in connection with the trafficking conspiracy itself. That fact continues to fuel anger and suspicion, because while the files revealed Epstein's vast social network, they do not deliver the simple answers many people hoped for. There is no single document that proves a global conspiracy. There is no definitive list of criminal clients. There is no smoking gun tying hundreds of powerful people to proven crimes. Instead, what exists is something more unsettling. A web of proximity, a portrait of how power works. A reminder that Epstein's greatest weapon was not secrecy. It was visibility. He did not hide from the powerful. He sought them out. He made himself useful. He made himself welcome. And in doing so, he built a shield that protected him for decades. The release of these files does not close the Epstein story. It complicates it. It raises new questions. It reinforces old suspicions. It exposes how easily influence and access can blur moral boundaries, and it leaves behind a haunting truth that the most dangerous predators do not always operate in the shadows. Sometimes, they operate in plain sight, smiling in photographs, shaking hands, attending parties, surrounded by the most powerful people in the world. And by the time the truth finally emerges, the damage has already been done.